Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Now it is time for us to look back on a weekend where Ross Byrne steered Ireland to a victory against Australia by 13 points to 10. That was a joint record equalling 12th successive win on home soil. An interesting weekend across the board. England looked well beaten against the All Blacks, but a huge performance from them in the last 20 minutes at Twickenham, rescuing a draw against New Zealand. France have ended the year unbeaten. They look at the moment still strong favourites to win the World Cup next year, while Georgia humbled Wales in Cardiff, and the Ireland flanker Josh van der Flier joined a very exclusive club of Irish players, along with Keith Wood and Johnny Sexton, by being named the World Player of the Year. Delighted to say I'm joined now by the former Ireland captain Brian O'Driscoll. Brian, how are you getting on?
Really good, Will, and you?
I'm good. We might start with Josh van der Flier before we break into the games themselves. What an achievement from him. If you consider end of the Six Nations of 2021, it looked like Will Connors had perhaps supplanted him as the first choice number 7 for Ireland. Then he has the disappointment of not being picked for the Lions tour, puts in a huge performance against Japan at home when he was left at home for that summer. And since then he hasn't looked back. He's been a key player for Ireland and Leinster over the last 18 months or so.
You've just stolen all of my research I've done in the last 15 minutes. I actually look back to the Six Nations in 2021, and obviously he played the first couple of games, and then Will Connors came in for his first cap and played in the fourth game, and then Josh came back in. I don't know whether that was down to an injury with Will Connors or through selection, but if you think about that, that's the end of March 2021, so it's 18 months ago. Like, it's pretty phenomenal where he has gone from the player he was then to World Player of the Year, and all you can do is tip your cap to him. He went and spoke to the coaching staff, asked them what he needed to do, what he needed to improve on. There was talk about better ball carrying, greater work rate. And do you know what? He has delivered on every area. Take away the try scoring, because sometimes he's in the right place at the right time at the back of those mauls. I think sometimes hookers and sevens get the credit for those scores when all the hard graft is done, before they cross the whitewash. But it's his overall game. It's everything. He's just had so many big moments. This huge tackle count, loads of carries. He's not the biggest guy in the world, but the effectiveness of his carries. I think what it is, it's a lesson to any rugby player in the world, because at the start of his career, without doing him a disservice, would you have thought that Josh van der Flier was ever going to be World Player of the Year? Not from what I saw back in those days, but the way he's improved, the way he's come on, the consistency of performance, to come from where he was from a talent point of view and add the graft and hard work and expertise that has gone into all of those performances and pull the whole lot together for a year of phenomenally consistent performances. I think it's an amazing thing, and something that every young player should look to aspire to being, because your talent and your ability will get you so far, but so much of that is down to hard graft, into work behind the scenes, into the actual one percenters here or there, nutrition, extras after training, analysis, all that, supplementation, all of that stuff thrown into the melting pot. It culminates in a player winning the World Player of the Year, and you could not be happier for him. On top of it all, he's one of the nicest guys you'll meet.
Well, I think it's all the more impressive as well. He achieves this at 28, 29 years of age too. It's not like we're talking about a very young flanker at the start of his journey. He has conversations with Stuart Lancaster, Dennis Leamy, Robin McBride about how he can carry the ball better. He said he was talking to Monaco at the weekend, said he did loads of video analysis about other players. He actually was looking at Caelan Doris as an example with the type of lines that he runs and the way that he carries the ball. To be able to make that kind of transformation to your game at what should really be at a very advanced period of your career, I think is all the more impressive.
Yeah, but he's probably at the peak of his powers, in all honesty. I think that depends on what air miles you have at that age profile in your career. But usually in around 27, 28 should be the peak of your physical powers. You've got enough experience under your belt to understand right from wrong, where you've made your mistakes in the past, how you can improve, and yet you haven't begun to fall over the other side of the cliff yet from a physical and injury profile point of view. So it is the perfect moment for him to deliver maximum performance, but that's just one factor. You talked about all of the work that he taught in the individuals and the analysis that he went away and talking, I'm sure he spoke to Caelan about his ball carrying and then trying to find his own way within that, because Doris is Doris. You're never going to be able to copy him to the same degree, but stealing aspects of players' profiles is what it's all about. I would have in the past done that from a captaincy point of view, looked when I didn't know ultimately how really to captain a team. I would have taken traits of different captains from school, Keith Wood, Martin Johnson, Deanna Quinnigan, aspects that really resonated with me, and I would have put them together into my style. And similarly, as a player, you would have taken, the footwork or handling of certain individuals, watched them ad nauseum as to how they did it, and then you put that together to create your own style of play. And I don't know, there aren't enough words to laud how impressed I am with what he's managed to do in a short space of time, to turn around uncertainty as to whether he was going to make Ireland's 23 in the coming years, to being World Player of the Year. And I think it's, as much I said last year that Antoine Dupont was a clear winning World Player of the Year, I think Josh van der Flier for me was a real standout. The others, that were nominated, obviously Dupont was Six Nations Player of the Year, is consistently very good. I'm unfortunate that he didn't play this November. I think that really hurt him. If he'd had big performances, who knows? And Johnny has been outstanding. Worthy noting, the oldest ever nominee for World Player of the Year by 3 years, I think. So, but for me, Josh really was the standout performer. And that's not just the Irishness in me, because, the other thing as well, I thought it was ridiculous that RD Sevilla wasn't nominated in that 4 or 5. Like, I thought in an all-black team that has not been good, I thought he had been outstanding over the course of every performance I saw him play in. So, but yet, Josh, it didn't feel as though it was necessarily a photo finish. I was very, very confident that he was going to win it.
Yeah, this might seem like an obvious point, but I would think the competition within the back row has possibly helped to improve him too. Because if you look at it, before Will Connors got injured, he was, as I said at the outset, the first choice number 7. He gets injured before the England game. Josh van der Flier gets back in, hasn't looked back since. Other than the Fiji game where he was rested, he's pretty much played every minute for Ireland, and some crucial games like all bar 8 minutes in New Zealand during the summer. That competition has probably helped to push him on to a large extent here too.
Of course it has. And the misfortune of certain people, Dan Levy obviously springs to mind as well, who had that huge year in 2018, was destined for greatness in the 7 jersey for Ireland. Probably had gazumped Josh, and then all of a sudden, he's gone for an extended period of time. Will has had multiple issues. But you have to remember as well, Scott Penny's in there, Max Deegan. All these guys are really good every time they pull on a Leinster jersey, and when they've been given their opportunity internationally, they haven't disappointed. So I definitely feel as though the competition for places has elevated his performance to another level, and it's something I think the most impressive part of all this is that as he was improving, he was never happy with it. You should never feel as though your job is done. And I think it's constant honing, constant evolving of a game and trying to improve. And like I said, it's the 1 and 2% is the difference when you get up to that very high threshold.
Van der Flier was saying in Monaco at the weekend that when he was in school, he could reel off every winner of the World Player of the Year, and said it was a huge dream of his to become World Player of the Year at some point. He's now fulfilled that. Is that one of the regrets from your career, Brian, that you never actually picked up this award?
Yeah, I think it is. I think there's not much where you look over the course of your playing career and you think, individual awards, individual accolades that, I really wanted that one, or, I that was one that I really sought out to get. But I'd be lying if I said that that World Player of the Year passing me by was a disappointment for sure, and one that I look back that the selection panel at the time. 2009 was probably my year. Richie McCaw ended up winning it. Trying to think what his name. South African number 9 World Cup winner. It'll come to me in a second. Myself, and I kind of thought it actually might be between the two of us and not as much Richie. And then it wasn't to be. But Richie McCaw is Richie McCaw. He's won it 3 times. He's arguably one of the greatest players, if not the greatest player of all time. So if you're going to lose out to someone, you might as well lose out to a great. But it definitely was one that stung, and it took a shine off what was a great year. I remember coming in after the South African game, and we'd won, having, I think we went the year unbeaten with Ireland. Obviously the disappointment of the Lions, but they were phenomenal games. And I just remember it was done differently back in those days. It was kind of announced right after the November series, and I had heard that Richie had won it, and it definitely took the wind out of my sails a small bit, because it was one that I would love to have been one for the grandkids more than anything, or your own kids, to be able to say once in my career that I was considered to be the best player in the world.
Yeah, Forey Dupree, I think, was the Springboks.
Forey Dupree, so of course it was, yeah. And listen, the thing about World Player of the Year is you'll always have people saying what an outrage to Josh van der Flier. He can't do this, he can't do that. And invariably it'll be people from South Africa or people from New Zealand. And likewise, if Josh hadn't won this one, we couldn't have possibly seen beyond him, where how could Lutanyo or Antoine Dupont manage this year? Dupont brilliant last year, but we were much better. So you're always going to have that. It's subjective. But I guess the subjectivity of the panel is all important. And I was part of it for a good few years, and I took it very seriously, because I realized the importance of it to an individual, having missed out on it. And I wanted to make sure that it wasn't flippantly decided upon. I'm not saying that it was previously, but I wanted to make sure that that there was a lot of conversing throughout the year, that we had a couple of catch-up calls, and that we made sure that as the season progressed, we had earmarked certain individuals for being in the conversation at the business end of the season. I stepped away from it last year, but I think they got it right in my absence this time round, for sure.
Yeah, because I think in 2009, I think the reason that many of us thought you were going to win that year was almost to mark Ireland's achievement with the Slam, and because it wasn't a World Cup year, it seemed that was going to be a large part of the selection process. It's interesting you thought about it, because here in the media sometimes we'll have these debates, and we had them a couple of weeks ago. Sexton getting in the shortlist, and Van der Flier's had such a good year. Looks like there's a very good chance of him winning. We're wondering if we're a bit too Irish-centric. But it is interesting you actually thought about it that year.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, well, once I was nominated, once you're nominated for anything, like the funny thing is, in 2008, I sat down with Michael Cheika, and I was in terrible personal form. I was a lot going on in my private life, and I just couldn't get out of this rut. And then I sat down with sports psychologist and more so with Cheika, and I kind of I made some goals for the following season, and one of them was to be nominated as World Player of the Year. And look back, and maybe I kicked myself in not saying I wanted to be not be nominated, but actually be World Player of the Year. I managed to achieve my goal for the year, but it was one rung too low. So, but I was nominated for World Player of the Year 3 times over the course of my career. Once I had a good chance in 2001 when Keith Wood won it. I thought I had a very good year that year. I thought the second time, I can't even remember what year it was, but I thought it was a bit of a token. Find myself in the nomination. I probably didn't feel I deserved it. And then in 2009, I thought I did deserve to be nominated as well. So it is something that as an individual, it's prestigious. It's our Ballon d'Or. It's built an even greater head of speed in more recent years as well, because of the acclaim that it gets, because of the thought process that goes into it, and the announcement at the World Rugby Awards and so on. So there is a greater prestige to it, and not just for the men, for the women, for the sevens players, for Coach of the Year. All of these are big awards. For Breakthrough Player of the Year, I saw Capuzzo win that. they're big moments in people's lives, because it gives you the confidence to elevate yourself to future successes and realize, I'm doing a lot right. And so, I think it is the one individual award over the course of my career that I would really have loved to have won.
Yeah, Terry Kennedy as well, winning Sevens Player of the Year.
Brilliant,
richly deserved,
phenomenal. Like, I followed the Sevens a lot. Obviously, I'm with the HSBC circuit, and consistently, I listen to all the commentators as well, and they know the depth of knowledge for them right across the board is exceptional. But every single event I went to, they were like, "Oh, what about Kennedy? What about Kennedy?" They were enthused by his kind of significant performances, and obviously Jordan Conroy gets a lot of kudos because of what he scores. But Terry's engine, ability to create, score himself, the bit of dog in him as well. Like he's your complete sevens player, and we probably don't associate ourselves really with sevens that much, and it doesn't get that much airtime. But on the world stage, for us to be able to deliver the world's best men's player and the best sevens player in one season is an exceptional outcome.
Yeah, well, especially when you consider it's so recently that the Sevens programme has been revived. To finish third in the world this season at the World Cup, to have got to an Olympic Games last year, albeit delayed by a year for Tokyo, and to have so many weapons on the pitch that they have right now, and you see how some of the players have gone into the Sevens programme and then kind of maybe 180 back into the 15s, like Balakoon and Hugo Keenan at the moment. It seems to be a very, very worthwhile system for Irish rugby right now.
Yeah, I think it really is. And there's two lines of thought. I spoke to a coach a while ago that I'd be quite friendly with, and I won't do him a disservice by naming him, but he actually thought it was detrimental to the development of some players going in and playing at sevens level, because they get taken out of the environment. It's a very different game. Yes, they might be able to work on some of their basic skills, work on their engine and so on, but actually it works in a negative capacity towards them. That was one line of thinking. On the other side, you're looking at Hugo, Will Connors, Balakoon, these guys that are breaking through into 15s environment for their provinces, and then subsequently for the national team as well. So it obviously does serve a purpose. You look at the All Blacks in the past, it's less so these days, where it was the obvious pathway into becoming an All Black. Everyone went through it. Jonah, Christian Cullen, Jeff Wilson, Bowden Barrett, Israel Dagg, all of these guys came through sevens. And so we were kind of scratching our heads thinking, are we missing a trick? And in fairness to Dave Nusafora, he got this 100% right. Even if you only get one player that comes through, but what you are doing is creating an additional platform for players to get exposure, get an ability to go out and play on the biggest stage, get to work on some of those basic skills, as I mentioned, if they aren't going to be getting game time back in Ireland. That is men and women as well. If you look at the quality of our women's sevens team, it's probably been ahead of our men for a couple of seasons, but now our men are catching up on them, and they've been very competitive. Again, not quite won a series event yet, but right in the mix in semi-finals and finals, and it's only a matter of time before we do have some success there from both men and women.
Yeah, fantastic for both Terry and Josh for the weekend in Monaco. Rugby here and Off the Ball is with thanks to Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us. We're going to take a short break. We'll take a look back at the weekend's matches when we come back.
Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Welcome back to Tuesday's Off the Ball. Brian O'Driscoll is still here with us. We're taking a look at Ireland 13, Australia 10 at the Aviva Stadium at the weekend. Brian, the significance would be this is now, by hook or by crook, 12 home wins in a row. It equals the run from 2018. I'm not sure if that's a scary prospect for Irish supporters to be at this point once again, a year out from a World Cup, or if it's something to celebrate, particularly two hard-fought victories, both against Australia and against South Africa. The game at the weekend, it was scrappy. Australia Australia had a lot of the ball. Ireland perhaps didn't play their best rugby, but yet found a way to win.
Yeah, that's a good summation of it. I think it's of the two scenarios that you suggested, I think it's definitely the better of the two, that we're back in a confident place. Having learned what we learned 4 years ago, I think I've said it on the show before, that the biggest change from thinking that we were the finished article, I'm not saying the lads thought they were the finished article 4 years ago, but they thought they probably got a little bit happy with how they were doing things. I think the greatest message that's coming out of camp is this constant evolution, this need for change, to always modify and change and continue to grow their game, that if we're playing this game in a year's time, it won't be enough. And they're right too. The only thing is about this game, the style that they're playing, is it's so heads up that it's reactive to the individuals pulling the passes, and so it's very hard for defenses to be able to predict what's going to unfold. So from where we are 4 years on, I'd be a lot more comfortable that there's a greater evolution of this game plan than there is of the last one. And then at the same time, it's brilliant to be able to scrap out and find a way when you're not at your best against, a very, very impressive Australian team. A very impressive on Saturday for where they are at the moment. I think they're a bit hit and miss, but I thought they had a very, very strong performance against us, held on to it for long periods. A couple of really good individual performances from them, even though they rode a few injuries that obviously could have been critical to them. So yeah, it was for the most part a very, very pleasing performance, almost the ideal performance to come out off the back of a November, because you leave plenty of room for improvement, but you're still somehow getting the job done.
Yeah, I kind of got the impression from Andy Farrell after the game, this was a bit of a series where they had to roll with the punches, particularly in the South Africa and in the Australia game. And in this case, none more so than Johnny Sexton losing him 20 odd minutes before kickoff, to the point that you basically have Crowley in Sexton's jersey and Ross Byrne is coming on in Crowley's jersey. That's how late the change was actually made. And yet you're putting in a player who's not got that many starts even for his province, but starting against one of the best teams in the world in Australia at home at the Aviva. That's probably all week preparing everything with Sexton and then having to put in a relatively rookie out half just within an hour of the game.
What's to say that won't happen come a year's time? We've got to be mindful that if we are to get to a final, it's 5 huge games, very physical games in a row for Johnny. And irrespective of age profiles and all of that, I don't think we can expect him to be available for all 5 of them. I just don't think we can, and we shouldn't rely on that fact. So I think this was a brilliant thing to happen for us to have to react to circumstances that were taken out of our control. They might have known that there was a chance Johnny was going to miss. Obviously, didn't know too well if Crowley was wearing his jersey. But all the more challenging for someone like Ross Byrne coming in, having not necessarily had a chance to run through anything over the course of the week. I think it probably served us really well. I think we do look like a different team. There's a broken record. We look like a different team with anyone other than Johnny, but it's brilliant that someone like Crowley is going to get game time. He looks as though he's a really nice footballer, and when he gets time at it and he gets a proper run at things, probably post World Cup, I think he'll be a really nice fit in the Irish jersey, and he'll grow, no doubt, in very quick space of time. But to be given an early test match against quality opposition like that, with Joey out, with him thrown in the deep end, I think will serve us really well. Yeah, it's great that you can still find a way to grind it out when you're not at your best, when indiscipline kind of ruled the game, where just a little bit of lack of accuracy compared to some of the other performances we've seen in the last year, but yet still find a way to conjure up a penalty that needed kicking, and then you defend for your lives. I think that's exactly the attitude that we need to build on top of all the finesse, all the grunt work, all the great work that's been done previously in New Zealand, in the Six Nations, even against France. I thought there were brilliant aspects to take away from that game. So I think this is just an additional string to our bow, but an additional aspect to where we know that we don't always have to be firing at 90% to be to win games against good opposition. that sometimes 80 will get us done if we make good decisions and keep error count low.
Can you explain why Ireland looks so different without Sexton on the pitch? Like, we look back to very good performance in Paris with Joey Carberry at number 10, but generally when Sexton's not been around, Ireland don't seem to have the same type of control on the game. Is that down to how used these players are to playing with Sexton in that position? Is that down to his leadership? What's the reason that Ireland looks so different when Sexton's not on the pitch?
It's both. I think he sees it better than everyone else. I think he's a bit dramatic to say, he's a photographic memory where he's able to look and he's able to take pictures of what he sees and compute the numbers that they've got more likelihood to attack left or right, or to set something up and then watch whether there's a fold or an overfold or an underfold and then react accordingly. He also knows everybody's role and he's dictating plays, telling everyone where he wants them to be, what's going to happen next. And there's a huge comfort that comes from that because he's been consistently a brilliant player for over a decade. And when there's a comfort that comes with seeing your best players, your most important player is there. I think everyone feels as though they can deliver their best, that they don't have to make that extra effort, that he's there to control things and to dictate play, and they can just be themselves. Whereas someone else comes into that environment that hasn't been given, that isn't captain, that hasn't got the reputation, that hasn't had the game time to allow themselves to get into that comfort space, it's going to be more challenging, and there's going to be a negative knock-on effect, for want of another phrase, to other players' performance, because there's an element more uncertainty. There's positionally, people just aren't sure what's happening next. Whereas Johnny's might be he's calling two rucks to be able to set up a third phase. That's what's actually happening. Whereas I don't think the other lads are doing that. And then on top of it, you've got someone that's able to commit players at the very last second. I do think Jack Crowley has a capability of getting to that space, of taking it really flat, and he was holding passes. He probably just needs to run a fraction straighter, if I'm honest. But the signs of what I saw at the weekend are very, very positive from his perspective. And to remember, Johnny's been doing this sort of game plan for 4 or 5 seasons with Leinster. Jack Crowley's just come back into the Munster team, which has gone through different coaching regimes and another change this year. They're still trying to find their identity as to how they're going to play. So that is going to take time from his perspective. But the more time he spends in Ireland camp, the more he watches Johnny, the more video he takes heed of, the better he will be in the long term.
Munster, in a way, have got a good problem now in that they've got Joey Carberry, Ben Healy and Jack Crowley available. But how do they spread the minutes out now? And I wonder, can Andy Farrell have an influence and have a chat with Graham Rowntree and say, hey, maybe continue the experiment of playing Joey Carberry back at 15 and I'd like to see Crowley or Healy at 10. It's not a bad situation to be in that they've got 3 potential first choice out halves here, but what way should they go?
Yeah, well, you see, was it Crowley played 15 against Leinster in a game where they were beaten well, except on the scoreboard. I thought he had a really strong performance. I think he's a real edge to him, and I think that's the beauty of him as a footballer. Similarly, Joey as well, that can play at 15. In fact, many people think that 15 is Joey's favourite position or best position. I think Crowley is someone that could adapt to 10, 12, 15 because he reads the game well. And it does feel like all of a sudden that Healy's probably down the pecking order to third. There was, question marks as to whether Carberry was going to be in or Healy, and now all of a sudden, I mentioned someone being gazumped earlier on. It feels as though Crowley now all of a sudden is vying for that starting berth with Joey, and it'll be all about who's able to put 2 or 3 consistent performances together, because whoever gets selected next, okay, if they go really well, they get another run, but if they don't go well in that next game, then someone else comes in, got catapulted in, and then they have a run at it. Whoever is the man in possession and is able to put 2 or 3 quality performances together should ordinarily be the number 10 for the rest of the season, provided their next few performances aren't substandard. And it feels as though, for me, on consistency, that Crowley possesses the greatest ability to do that on the small bit that I have seen of him this year. But the fact that he can play 15 too is a spanner in the works in getting your best players on the park. Although in the same breath, Mike Haley will have something to say about that. So I don't know. That's not my problem to worry about. But it is Andy Farrell's, it is Graham Roundtree's, but it is a nice problem to have that now all of a sudden you've got two out halves in your province that are competing for international honours. It means that their standards are higher than where they've been in previous years.
Ross Byrne reminded everybody with that kick 3 minutes from time that he hasn't gone away. He's effectively been in the cold internationally since the end of the Six Nations in 2021. Gets the call to come into camp last Monday, comes on, probably didn't expect that he was going to be part of the matchday 23 even on the day on Saturday. Tricky enough kick in the circumstances, slots it over no problem whatsoever. Does he now come back into consideration for the World Cup, or where is Ross Byrne at in this out half depth chart, if we're to put it that way?
I think, first of all, an incredibly clutch kick. I think, tip your cap to him. I thought it was, the beauty first and foremost was he never thought there was never no conversation. I'll just nudge this to the corner. It wasn't a case of him not liking the look of it. Ross Byrne, in my eyes, the best part of his game is his goal kicking. He is one of the guys you would put your house on, not just in Irish rugby, but I don't know. I can't think of too many more that you would feel huge confidence. You look at his stats, but there's a composure to his kicking. There's a huge confidence to it that doesn't necessarily always resonate with the rest of his game. But I think as a goal kicker, he's absolutely outstanding. I'm pleased to see him come through and have a moment like that. You could see the love from his Leinster teammates, knowing the struggles that have gone on previously. He's been a bit unlucky with the Irish teams that he has been involved in. England before the World Cup, there was another very tough day at the office. Even from a provincial point of view, he played in the semi-final against La Rochelle when things didn't go well. He came on and perhaps didn't deliver his best performance in the final. I wouldn't mind that per se. But I guess what are you looking for in your 10? Are you someone that really takes the ball aggressively to the line and picks passes? Or are you looking for someone that has a very confident kicking game that will play the corners, that is proficient in the passing game, but not to the same degree as other players? And I suppose that's the query. I think he's improved in that regard. I think he's takes the ball a bit more aggressively to the line, but not to the same degree as Johnny, for sure. And I just like the look of Crowley next after that, more so than Carberry, and I think Ross is probably fourth in that regard. So it just depends on what you're looking for. Are you looking for massive security and a super solid performer, which I think Ross is? But are you looking for a little bit more in the X factor that the likes of Crowley has, and maybe there'll be the odd mishap here or there, but there's definitely an ability to break games in his performance, like there is in Joey. I think there's less confidence in that with Joey now because he hasn't had a chance to have a proper run at things. But it is there somewhere with Joey. You just need to see it again, need to have it brought back out. But I feel the more I do watch Jack Crowley, the more confident I feel that he is a potential heir to the throne.
Yeah, that race for number 3 seems particularly wide open, especially if you consider that the Irish coaching team clearly are very fond of Kieran Frawley as well. And Frawley will add that versatility, and you could pick him and he can play multiple positions too. I mean, he's not out of contention at all to go to France next year.
No, he's not. But I suppose if you are talking about versatility, yes, Crowley does play Frawley does play 12, but and 15. But you are looking at the likes of Jimmy O'Brien now coming in, can play in the wing, in the centre, and at fullback. You can play Crowley at fullback if you have to. All of a sudden now, again, the guy in possession. Frawley perhaps didn't have his greatest game against the All Black selection. And as a result, others have been given their chance on decent performances. And Crowley really stood up to it. It was far from a perfect performance on Saturday, by the way. I thought it was one of his
felt
first
his way
kicks
into it
to
a little
touch.
bit, I thought.
One of his first kicks to touch was so tentative. Yeah, really tentative. Big slice. It was like something out of my kicking locker. But yeah, he eased his way into it. You were willing over that first penalty for him. And And I think he was, very, very proficient, defended stoutly. Unlucky, gave away a penalty for not rolling away, but not much he could do. But the rest of his game, very, very solid. I think sometimes, he'll look and see Ross Byrne coming on and kicking the winning goal and getting the headlines and getting credit, which he should deserve to do. But I do think that Crowley, for a first outing against a top team, I think it was a pretty good performance with a bit to work on as well, and will be much better for it. So I think in all of these cases, we're always thinking about what the ceiling looks like, what the capabilities are. And I think the one thing with Josh Van Flier, to go back to him, is I don't think he gave himself no ceiling, and that's why he's able to get to where he got to. And I think that's the important thing with these other players coming through, what they're capable of doing. And I just feel as though, again, the greatest ceiling from a talent perspective looks as though Crowley now is in behind Johnny.
Australia will probably be kicking themselves. They didn't make more of the possession that they had, particularly in the first half. 62% of the ball, ended up with 54% over the 80 plus minutes. It took nearly an hour to play that first half. Tennis Tank has been in touch on YouTube. Can you ask Brian, how do we adapt to teams who play keep ball against us? It's something Australia did pretty effectively. How do Ireland combat teams that go out to play like that, particularly with the World Cup in mind next year?
Yeah, well, obviously everyone is looking for an Achilles heel with Ireland. You could argue that maybe their kicking game, both chasing and receipt, hasn't been what you might expect it to be. That they could be challenged in the air. That certain teams are going into that chip space because Ireland are coming off the line very aggressively. So is there some access to be had with it? I do think as though that a team that loves possession, a bit like, okay, I'm reticent to compare Ireland currently with Barcelona, but you look at that tiki-taka holding possession, that's what they love. And then all of a sudden there's one lapse in concentration or, creation of space by that interplay. All of a sudden they've got a chance. But I think if you take that away from them, if you become the possession team, all of a sudden you take out their greatest skill, their ability to be able to create chances. And the thing is, it's about patience with chances. It's if you get your shape right and you pick the right pass, well, you've a chance of a line break. But even if you don't pick the right pass, you recycle well, you look after things with your basics, all of a sudden you create another opportunity in a phase or 2 phases time. And that's the real strength of this Ireland team. They don't go chasing after it every single time. They're patient with their opportunities. And so if you take the ball away from them and they have to defend, and you play miserly and you look after the ball yourself well from a ruck perspective, well, they're going to get frustrated and not going to be able to deliver their best performance. The only thing I would say about Ireland is it's hard to do that against Ireland, to hold possession, because they're so bloody good at the ruck. And as soon as you don't put enough numbers in there, Doris or Tyg Byrne or Porter will be in pilfering ball from you. So you have to be so accurate at your ruck, which I don't know if other teams have realised the attention that Ireland give to their ruck. And I think that is a significant point of difference at this moment in time, that their accuracy is so good defensively and in attack.
Bundy Aki made a good impression from the bench. Even the try aside, he came in, he was very busy, got in good go-forward ball. Stuart McCloskey maybe had a quieter game than the South Africa game. I know you were talking about McCloskey with Ger last week, but I'm interested in what you thought of the Australia performance. He went through Foley at one point, but what did you make of McCloskey last weekend?
It was frustrating for him, wasn't it? You really felt, if I'm honest, I thought it must have felt like a big missed opportunity, because he just didn't get a stranglehold on the game. A couple of times he got 1 or 2 balls to carry in, a bit inside shoulder, didn't carry with the same venom that he ordinarily would. There wasn't quite the same cohesion with Crowley, and it would have been a new relationship that would have worked together last week. So it felt, and I mentioned beforehand, that all of a sudden that now McCluskey and Bundy were vying for the same position in that World Cup squad. And if McCluskey had put down a big marker, that was going to be a huge threat to Bundy. But then on the flip to that, Bundy coming in, besides scoring the try, but also I watched him in pushing Ringrose out of the way for that score. It was like, oh no, I'm the guy to carry from 4 metres out, and I'm not going to be stopped here. And McCluskey would have been that guy too. but he wasn't on the field, and Bundy came on, did a good job, good communication, good basics, and it did feel that it was a significant contrast between a guy that had a quiet game and a guy that had been bulling to get on and then delivered when it was asked of him. So it feels very much advantage to Bundy again.
If you were Australia captain last Saturday, would you have been frustrated? 4 neck roll penalties which were given away during the game. They go down to 13 men for their own, basically through their own cause. Last night we'd Andy Dunn here saying they need to learn from this. They had yellow cards and gave away loads of penalties during the Rugby Championship as well. Would you be frustrated that in so many occasions when they're actually in decent positions, Australia shot themselves in the foot with their indiscipline at the weekend?
Yeah, you would be frustrated. I think it's difficult because I think that's largely to do with Ireland's really good body positions in rucks as well. It's not just an Australian issue. I think it's credit to Ireland, because the only way to move those players, they were latched on, and the only position that you can get immediate access to pull away a player away from ruck is with their head. You can't get that access with locking arms or pivoting. Obviously the crocodile roll is being outlawed. So if you lose the shoulder, that's the only way to actually contort a body to get it away. So that's not just the shortcomings of Australia. I think that huge credit and kudos has to be given to Ireland to get into those strong body positions to make it more difficult to move. Just one of the frustrations about Australia, obviously, is going down to 13 men. But I must say, and I don't know if you noticed, I think Josh van der Flier went across to Peter O'Mahony when the penalty was given at that time, and had a word about them going that if they'd taken a scrum there and then. They obviously kicked for a line out, but they could have had 10 minutes exactly with 13 men. And I think you've got to capitalise on those situations. To wait for 3 or 4 minutes into the second half for them to go down, for there to be a scrum, and for them to go down to 13 men. So I think those things are important retrospectively, that the message comes on from, even if you're not clear of thought as a captain or as a leader, it felt as though Josh knew what was going to happen. And then, you might forego 30 or 40 metres up the field, but you've got an additional player for 10 minutes. You've got to take advantage of what seems like a strange rule. That's not our problem. If they've infringed, they've lost a player, and then they lose their hooker to a yellow card, well, let's take advantage of it as much as you possibly can. So there's another thing to learn from if it does happen over the course of the next year, particularly at World Cup, that you know your rules and you use them to your effect.
Yeah, got to turn the screw. It is a bit like a very different selection the week before against Fiji, where I think the frustration was there for Andy Farrell when he thought Ireland really need to kick on. And they didn't at a point when they had an extra man in that game too. Like, we talk about all these different things that have to be worked on. They're the small percentiles that could make a big difference here.
Yeah, well, they're the differences in winning a quarter-final against New Zealand or France. And that's the reality of it. Like, it's funny. Every time you get excited and giddy about it, you realise the magnitude of that one game, provided you get there as well. Let's pay a bit of respect to Scotland as well. Yes, we are number one in the world, but they will make life very, very difficult in the World Cup. You would hope on current form that we'll have enough to get that job done. Then you're qualifying, provided you'll either win or lose to South Africa, and that'll have you first or second seed, you would imagine. So if you put it into context that way, and then your reward is France or New Zealand, you're going to have to play at close to 100% to beat France at home or New Zealand in a World Cup. And so all of those little factors are all going to be huge in the outcome in that 80-minute World Cup quarter-final, provided we get there for Scotland Online, in case you're listening.
Yeah, I do like how that caveat has to come out every time. Do you think the world rankings are reflective of where teams are? Because I mentioned at the outset, France got their win against Japan at the weekend. No Dupont, Entimac on the bench, an impressive win in its own right. They're unbeaten for the year. You look at Australia in 9th, seems like a bit of a false position based on what we've seen last weekend and their performance against France as well. Do you see Ireland being a little bit ahead of the pack at the moment, or are the world rankings actually reflective?
I think France or Ireland are neck and neck. If it was them one and us two, I don't think you'd have too many complaints. But I think on the basis, the thing is, the credit that this team has has derived from the series win in New Zealand during the summer is significant, and there's residuals from that. Whatever about the actual point factor on World Cup rankings, I think from a credibility point of view, people are like Josh van der Flier. Okay, he was named. Ireland only finished second in Six Nations, yeah, but we won the series down in New Zealand. That is absolutely enormous, and there's a huge credibility that comes with that. And then you go and win your 3 home games in November as well. So I think we absolutely are deserving to be number one. You wouldn't be devastated to be just a smidgen behind France because they're very, very strong at the moment. But world rankings won't count for anything going into a World Cup. Or New Zealand will be a lot better in a year's time with more time under Joe. And France, we don't know whether it'll get too much for them, and they'll proverbially shit the bed. We'll have to wait and see. Don't know if I can say that before the threshold, but I have.
Well, look, New Zealand, the press were talking about even Schmidt-Ball last weekend, and they're talking about how things are transforming. They'll be disappointed, Brian, I would think, though, given 25-6 up at Twickenham on Saturday. They should have killed the game. But maybe that's the kick up the arse that they needed, maybe.
Yeah, and they're going to need a few of those. Like I think there's a big reminder that they're not where this All Black team was previously, and that reputation now will not carry them through. Where other sides now sense that they're definitely not. There's a soft underbelly, but there's definitely the resolve that was always there is being tested, and that they haven't been able to deliver in where in years gone by they were always able to deliver. So they're going to have to rebuild all that. They're going to have to build that huge respect that teams would have always had for years. Teams will always respect, but now all of a sudden I don't think teams are afraid of the All Blacks, and that's the differential, where they're not going to put them on the pedestal that they perhaps once did, and that was a real tool to them and a strength of theirs, and you take that away and look at what's come of the last year when Japan pushed them close, where Argentina beat them, where we won a series down there, where other sides have picked them off too, where they've struggled in Scotland and obviously in England. Like, this is not the All Blacks that we've come to expect, but be wary of any wounded team, particularly one of the best in the world over the last 100 years.
And World Rugby, Brian, they say they're now looking at the circumstances about those events that happened at the Aviva on Saturday. Nick White was allowed to return to the field eventually, despite clear signs he'd sustained a head injury in 2 collisions during the game. He's been stood down since for 12 days. He's going to miss the final game of their tour against Wales this weekend. He was unsteady on his feet. We were wondering how it could get to a point that he'd be back out for the second collision, which came with the boot of Josh van der Flier after his earlier one with Mac Hansen. The explanation we got was that the independent matchday doctor and the Australian medical team were actually looking at the footage of the first incident with Hansen, which is why they missed the second one. What was your take on what happened at the weekend?
Yeah, your initial thought is he is unsteady, and the referee said I saw him wobble, and so maybe a bit more ownership from the referee. It's funny because I listened to all of the coverage. I saw what Rob Kearney said, what Matt Williams said, and to a point, Matt is correct in a couple of things. You don't just have a wobble on the back of a head injury. You can have a dead leg and you can't put weight through it, and so you move or you wobble to stand back on your other leg, or take a big shot in your sternum and it knocks the stuffing out of you. It doesn't always have to be. That said, the pictures that we saw and the head collision put in unison with that speed, that wobble, led us to believe that looks like a head injury. And World Rugby dictates that if there's any loss of balance, that there's no HIA activated. Well, the powers that be are saying they were looking at a different one. There's going to be ones that slip through the net. It's just when the magnitude of them is so serious and so visible for everyone, it just doesn't do the game the service it deserves, because we have come on leaps and bounds, but there's going to continue to be some of these that fall by the wayside. But it's frustrating because that's the talking point all of a sudden, not the great, the competitive game, the physicality, the niggle that we had amongst the two teams, the imperfect rugby, but yet still very enjoyable. All of that falls by the wayside, and all of a sudden here we are talking about a HIA or a concussion that should have been dealt with better and differently. So, I guess it's frustrating, the outcome, but yet I'm not going to throw Matt under the bus. He's right in saying that it's not only a head injury that delivers a wobble, a lack of balance like that, and you do have to put faith in the medics, but yet even they can get it wrong, as they've suggested they did, because they looked at the wrong footage. Yeah,
and even to take it away from rugby, I don't know if you saw the incident in the Iran game yesterday where the goalkeeper...
I only heard about it. Yeah, I heard about it.
He effectively, it took about 7 or 8 minutes. He came back on. Again, he was visibly very shaky on his feet, and eventually he went off. So the protocols can always be looked at and can always be improved.
100%. There's lots of moving parts, and there's such nervousness around it now because of the cases being taken against different unions and against World Rugby, and everyone's scared of their lives to do anything. The reality is it's a very physical game. There's going to be these concussive episodes, but we just have to try and make sure that so very few of them fall between the net, that we catch as many as we possibly can. There will be the occasional one, hopefully not high end, not to the detriment of the individual, that will find a way to get back on the field, because that's the rugby playing animal that wants to get back out there and compete. But the more we can reduce them and lessen them, the more safeguarded the game will be.
Well, Rugby and Off the Ball, with thanks to Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish Rugby team. We all belong to the team of us. Brian, pleasure as always. Thanks again.
Thanks, Will. Good to chat. Talk to you.
Brian O'Driscoll on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish Rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.